James had inherited his grandfather's ranch, a sprawling property that stretched far beyond the little town's borders. It wasn't just land, it was history, with a century-old barn that stood as a symbol of his family's hard work. The barn wasn't used much anymore, but James kept it up out of respect, repainting it every few years and making sure its roof stayed solid. To him, it was priceless, but to the local HOA, it was an eyesore. Karen, the head of the HOA, had been on James for months. She would drive by, roll down her window, and shout across the fence about community standards and property values. James always laughed her off. After all, his ranch sat on his own deeded land, miles outside of their HOA's real authority. Still, Karen believed her board had the right to decide what belonged and what didn't. One morning, James returned from town to find the unthinkable. His barn reduced to rubble. Bulldozers still sat on the property, and workers were hauling away the beams. He ran toward them, shouting. The foreman shrugged and pointed toward Karen, who stood nearby in her blazer and sunglasses like she had conquered something. "Your barn violated standards," she said smugly. "We've taken care of it for the good of the community." James's chest tightened with rage. They had destroyed his family's barn, illegally, without warning. But as Karen strutted back to her SUV, James felt a different kind of power rising in him. He remembered something his grandfather had told him years ago. The ranch doesn't just sit next to the lake. We own the water that feeds it. That night, James walked down to the dam that sat on his land, controlling the flow of water into the massive lake the HOA's resort community had built their wealth upon. Luxurious houses, golf courses, and even a fancy lakeside resort relied on that water. James leaned over, studied the valve, and smiled grimly. The next morning, the HOA woke up to chaos. The lake's waterline had dropped dramatically, boats sat tilted in the mud, and the resort's beach lay cracked and dry. Residents panicked, demanding answers. Karen stormed over to James's ranch, red-faced and screaming that he had no right to interfere with their lake. James simply held up the deed. "This dam, this water, and this land? They've been in my family for over 100 years. You demolished my barn, so I shut off my water. Seems fair." The silence that followed was louder than Karen's shrieking ever could be. From then on, the HOA never touched James's property again. And though the barn was gone, James made sure his grandfather's legacy stood stronger than ever, in the form of a lake they could no longer take for granted.